Many years ago, in a crowded neighborhood in Accra, lived a young girl named Richie. Richie was only 18 years old, but she was full of curiosity, full of questions, and permanently attached to a small smartphone whose cracked screen had survived many falls like a stubborn goat. The compound where Richie lived was the type of place where privacy had never been successfully introduced. Four families lived there, so they shared the same gates as well as the same arguments sometimes. Richie lived there with her mother, Mama Abena, a hard-working woman whose kinke business had raised Richie from a small girl who chased chickens to a young woman who chased stories. Mama Abena woke up before sunrise every morning, wrapped her head with a colorful cloth, and then began preparing kinke dough while complaining loudly about the government, the cost of charcoal, and the mysterious disappearance of socks from the laundry line. But Richie had a different hobby. She loved recording everything. She recorded children playing football in the narrow yard. She recorded Auntie Efwa shouting at the water tap when someone jumped the queue. She recorded her mother arguing with the fish seller who insisted that the fish had become expensive because the fish themselves were now attending university. One afternoon, Mama Abena stood in the doorway watching Richie film a small boy chasing a chicken across the compound. "Richie!" she shouted. "Yes, Mama," Richie replied without lowering the phone. "Are you a journalist or a professional nuisance?" Richie laughed. "I am practicing." "For what?" "For my future," Richie replied. Mama Abena folded her arms. "See, if your future includes washing plates, then you are already qualified." Richie grinned. "Mama, you'll see. One day, my videos will appear on television." Mama Abena shook her head slowly. "My daughter, if recording people brought money, Auntie Efwa would already own a bank by now." Just then, Auntie Efwa herself appeared near the water tap carrying a bucket. Auntie Efwa was the unofficial news broadcaster of the compound. Nothing happened within 2 streets without her knowledge. Some people believed she possessed supernatural listening ability. She spotted Richie immediately. "Ah, the camera girl is working again." Richie turned the phone toward her. "Good afternoon, Auntie Efwa." Auntie Efwa waved her hand quickly. Don't record me. Last time you recorded me arguing with the tomato seller and my sister in Kumasi saw the video." Richie laughed. "But you became famous." Auntie Efwa lowered her voice. "My sister said I was behaving like a politician." Mama Abena laughed loudly from the doorway. "But that description fits you perfectly." The whole compound burst into laughter. Richie loved moments like that. Life in the compound felt like a moving drama with different actors entering and leaving every day. Her phone was her notebook, her camera, and sometimes her shield against boredom. However, there were other characters in the compound too. One of them was Mr. Kweku Mensah, a wealthy businessman who owned the large blue car that everybody admired from a respectful distance. Mr. Mensah was known as a polite man who greeted everyone with a smile that looked expensive. Whenever he returned home, Auntie Efwa always whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "That man smells like money." Richie had also recorded Mr. Mensah several times greeting neighbors or giving small coins to children who ran to the gates when his car arrived. Another respected visitor in the compound was Pastor Nyako, a tall man whose voice permanently sounded like that of a preacher, even on weekdays. The pastor visited Mr. Mensah frequently. Sometimes they sat near the gate discussing serious matters while nodding like two men planning the future of the entire country. Richie once laughed about them while filming. "Breaking news," she whispered into the camera dramatically. "The leaders of the compound are holding a meeting." Your paddy, her childhood friend who lived 2 doors away, laughed so hard that day that he almost dropped his bowl of rice. "You'll get yourself into trouble one day," he warned. "Trouble needs a camera too," Richie replied proudly. That evening, as the sun began to sink slowly behind the houses, Richie climbed the narrow staircase that led to the small balcony overlooking the compound gates. She often went there to record sunset videos for practice. She said the lights looked beautiful from that angle, although Mama Abena believed she just went there to avoid washing plates. Richie held up her phone and began recording the quiet sunset sky. Accra evening, she whispered into the camera, "Very beautiful." The compound gate stood partly open below and Mr. Mensah's blue car was parked near the entrance. Richie continued recording. Then something caught her attention. Two men stood near the car speaking quietly. Richie lowered the phone slightly to see them more clearly. It was Mr. Mensah, and standing beside him was Pastor Nyako. Their voices sounded unusually serious. Richie did not intend to record them, but the camera continued running while she adjusted the angle toward the sunset, and the conversation drifted upward toward the balcony. "It must happen tonight," Mr. Mensah was saying. Pastor Nyako replied, "Are you sure nobody will talk?" Mr. Mensah answered, "The girl must not speak." Richie frowned slightly. Pastor Nyako nodded slowly. "We'll move her after dark." Richie paused. The words sounded strange, but she did not fully understand them. Just then, her friend, your paddy, suddenly shouted from below, "Richie, your mother is looking for you." Richie jumped. "I am coming." She stopped the recording quickly and her phone saved the video automatically. Richie slipped the phone into her pocket and ran downstairs without another thought. Mama Abena stood beside the cooking pot impatiently, like a woman who had been waiting long enough to deliver a speech. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Upstairs," Richie replied. "Doing what?" "I was recording the sunset," Richie replied. Mama Abena placed both hands on her waist. "Richie, the sunset has been happening every day since creation. Leave it alone and come and pound this pepper for me." Richie laughed. "Yes, Mama." She placed the phone on the wooden table and began helping her mother prepare the evening food. That night passed normally and Richie slept peacefully. The small video she recorded remained inside her phone like a forgotten guest. By morning, the compound became filled with its usual noise of buckets hitting the water tap, Auntie F were arguing with someone about queue order, and a goat protesting loudly for reasons nobody understood. Richie woke up and stretched like a cat that had just completed a long business meeting with sleep. Mama Abena called from the kitchen. "Richie!" "Yes, Mama." "Take this tray of eggs to the shop before you start recording people brushing their teeth." Richie smiled. "I am coming." She picked up the tray and walked towards the gates. Near the junction, a small crowd had gathered around a group of women speaking loudly. Richie slowed down because in towns like theirs, crowds usually meant one of three things: a fight, a scandal, or a missing person. Auntie Efwa stood in the middle of the group looking extremely important. Richie approached them carefully and asked, "What happened?" Auntie Efwa lowered her voice dramatically. "Have you not heard?" "Heard what?" "Akosua is missing." Richie frowned. "Which Akosua?" "The girl who sells phone cards near the junction." Richie blinked. "That quiet girl?" Auntie Efwa nodded. "Yes." "Maybe she traveled," Richie suggested. Auntie Efwa shook her head. "She did not take her clothes." Another woman joined the conversation. "And her slippers are still outside her room." The crowd murmured uneasily. Richie felt a small strange feeling in her chest. Akosua had been part of the neighborhood background, like street lights and traffic noise. She sat near the junction every day, selling recharge cards and greeting passers-by politely. Someone else spoke up. "They said she disappeared at night." Auntie F1 nodded. "Just like that." The crowd continued discussing the situation conversation while Richie delivered the eggs to the shop and returned home. But the story stayed inside her mind. Later that afternoon, she sat on the bench outside the house scrolling through videos on her phone. She liked reviewing recordings to practice editing. She scrolled through videos of children playing football, Mama Abena shouting at the charcoal seller, your paddy dancing badly during a birthday party. Richie smiled while watching it. Then she reached the video she recorded the previous evening, the sunset video. She pressed play and the orange sky appeared on the screen. Birds flew across the horizon. Then the camera shifted slightly and the compound gates came into view. Two men stood beside Mr. Mensah's blue car. Richie leaned closer. The audio was clear. It must happen tonight, Mr. Mensah was saying. Richie froze. She listened carefully. Pastor Nyako's voice answered, are you sure nobody will talk? Mr. Mensah replied, the girl must not speak. Richie felt a small chill run across her arms. Pastor Nyako continued, we will move her after dark. The video suddenly ended when Richie stopped recording. Richie stared at the phone. That sounds strange, she murmured. Suddenly, your paddy appeared again from the gate. What sounds strange? He asked. Richie turned the phone toward him. Listen to this. Your paddy sat beside her while the video played again. They listened to it and when the conversation ended, your paddy frowned. That sounds serious. Then he shrugged and said, maybe they were discussing church counseling. Richie shook her head slowly. Do you think pastors move people after dark? Your paddy laughed. You watch too many crime movies. But the words remained inside her mind like a mosquito that refused to leave. Later that evening, another rumor began spreading through the compound. Auntie Efwa arrived again, carrying fresh information like a journalist returning from a war zone. The police came to the junction, she announced. Mama Abena looked up from her cooking pot. Why? They are asking about Akosua. Richie looked up immediately. Did they find her? Auntie Efwa shook her head. No. The compound fell silent for a moment. Then Mama Abena said, maybe she traveled secretly. Auntie Efwa lowered her voice. Her family says she never told anyone she was traveling. Richie looked at her phone again. The strange conversation echoed in her mind. The girl must not speak. We will move her after dark. Richie felt the same uneasy chill again. For the first time since she started recording videos for fun, she began wondering if her camera had accidentally captured something that was not meant to be seen. That evening, Richie sat quietly on the wooden bench outside the house, staring at her phone like a student staring at an exam question that looked simple but refused to answer itself. The compound moved around her in its usual evening rhythm. A woman argued with a tomato seller about the meaning of fresh, and someone's radio played high life music that sounded older than most of the people listening to it. But Richie was not paying attention to any of that. Her mind kept replaying the same sentence. The girl must not speak. She opened the video again. Mr. Mensah's voice sounded calm, too calm for a conversation that mentioned moving someone at night. Your paddy came and sat beside her chewing roasted granuts. You have played that video 5 times already, he said. Richie did not look up. She just said, I want to hear it properly. Your paddy leaned closer to the screen. The conversation ended again. He scratched his head and said, it sounds suspicious though. Richie finally sighed. But suspicious of what? Your paddy shrugged. Maybe they were talking about church counseling. Richie shook her head slowly. You don't counsel people secretly beside a car. Your paddy nodded thoughtfully. That is true. For a moment, both of them sat quietly. Then Auntie Efwa appeared at the gate and announced loudly, have you heard the latest news? Mama Abena answered from inside the kitchen. What is it now? Auntie Efwa lowered her voice dramatically. Another girl has disappeared. Richie sat upright. What? Yes. Who is that? Richie asked. The seamstress apprentice near the market. Mama Abena stepped outside immediately. What do you mean disappeared? Auntie Efua spread her hands. She closed the shop yesterday evening and nobody saw her after that. The compound became quiet. Richie's stomach tightened. 2 girls missing within the same week. Richie looked at your paddy slowly. You see why that video is disturbing. Your paddy swallowed hard. But we don't know anything yet. That night, sleep did not visit Richie easily. She lay on her bed staring at the ceiling while the fan turned slowly above her like a tired helicopter. Around midnight, she finally slept. However, morning came with another rumor. Someone claimed to have seen Mr. Mensah's blue car driving very late at night 2 days ago. Another person claimed that the car passed the junction where Akosua usually sat. Richie heard the story while standing near the water tap. Auntie Efua was explaining it loudly to anyone who would listen. I am telling you, the car passed around midnight. Mama Abena frowned. Maybe he was coming back from work. Who works at midnight? Auntie Efua asked. Richie stood quietly beside them holding her bucket. Her mind began connecting things the way puzzle pieces slowly find their partners. The video, the missing girl, the midnight car. That afternoon, Richie did something different. Instead of recording funny random compound scenes, she began filming carefully. She filmed around the compound gates, the parking area, and the road outside. Your paddy noticed it immediately. You are investigating now? He asked. Richie shrugged. I just want to observe. Your paddy smiled. You are becoming a detective. Richie lifted her phone. I am only becoming careful. And then that night, something strange happened. Richie suddenly woke up. At first, she did not know why, but then she heard the sound of a car engine. She slipped quietly out of bed and walked toward the window. Mr. Mensah's blue car stood near the gate. The headlights were off, but the engine was running. Richie's heart began beating faster. She grabbed her phone quickly and stepped out carefully onto the small balcony above the compound. Richie held her phone well and began recording. Below her, the car door opened and Mr. Mensah stepped out. A tall figure joined him from the shadow near the gate. Richie zoomed the camera slightly and saw him. Pastor Nyako. The 2 men spoke quietly, so Richie could not hear the words clearly this time. Then something else happened. The back door of the car opened and someone inside the car moved slightly. Richie's stomach tightened. The person inside did not move like someone sitting comfortably. The movement was slow and weak, almost like someone struggling. Richie held her phone tighter and the camera recorded everything silently. For a moment, she felt real fear. The car door closed again. Mr. Mensah returned to the driver's seat and the blue car slowly left the compound. Richie stood frozen on the balcony. At that moment, she wished she had never pressed the record button because the more she watched the video, the more one terrible possibility began forming in her mind. The missing girls might not have disappeared by accident. She replayed the moments where the back door of the car opened and the weak movements inside the vehicle appeared again. Someone was inside that car, someone who did not look free to leave. Richie slowly lowered the phone and whispered, "This is serious." The next morning, the compound woke up with its usual noise, but Richie moved through the morning like someone carrying a secret in her pocket. She looked around until she saw your paddy sitting near the gates. She walked straight to him. "I need to show you something." Your paddy wiped his hands and leaned closer. "What is it?" Richie played the video. Your paddy watched carefully. When the back door opened on the screen, he leaned forward. "Wait!" Richie replayed that moment again. Your paddy's cheerful expression slowly disappeared. "That person inside the car does not look normal." Richie nodded slowly. "I know." Your paddy scratched his head. "This is no longer a joke." Richie lowered her voice. "I think those missing girls are involved." Your paddy looked looked around the compound before speaking again. If this is true, we must tell someone. Richie nodded. I was thinking the same thing. Your paddy folded his arms. But we must be careful. Richie frowned. Careful? Yes, he nodded. Why? Your paddy leaned closer and said, you are accusing two very respected people. Richie hesitated. That was true. Mr. Mensah was respected in the compound, while Pastor Nyako preached every Sunday at church. Nobody would believe that such men could be involved in anything dark. Your paddy finally said, let me take the phone. I will watch the video carefully tonight. Tomorrow, we'll decide what to do. Richie hesitated for a moment. Your paddy noticed and asked, you don't trust me? Richie quickly shook her head. I trust you. After all, he had been her friend since childhood. The boy who once helped her chase goats out of the kitchen. The boy who always appeared when she recorded funny compound videos. Richie handed him the phone and said, just be careful. Your paddy nodded, I will. However, that evening, Richie felt strangely restless. She expected your paddy to return the phone before night, but he did not come. Night passed and morning arrived. Still, there was no sign of him. Richie walked toward his room. The door was slightly open. She knocked, but no one answered. She pushed the door gently, but your paddy was not inside. Richie felt a small knot form inside her stomach. She walked back toward the compound gate slowly. Just then, she saw something that made her heart skip. Mr. Mensah's blue car entered the compound and your paddy stepped out of the passenger seat. Richie froze. For a moment, her brain refused to understand what she was saying. Your paddy laughed at something Mr. Mensah said and Mr. Mensah patted him on the shoulder like a man praising a loyal assistant. Richie's chest tightened. Your paddy looked up. Their eyes met and the smile on his face disappeared instantly. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then your paddy walked toward her slowly. Richie, he said. Richie's voice came out weak. You were in his car. Your paddy looked around the compound before speaking. Let us talk somewhere else, please. Richie shook her head slowly. No. Your paddy lowered his voice. You should not have recorded those things. Richie felt the ground shift under her feet. You knew? Your paddy sighed. Richie, please listen to me. I asked a question. You knew? Your paddy rubbed his forehead and said, it is complicated. Richie laughed. Complicated? Her voice trembled slightly. You were the one telling me to observe. Your paddy looked defenseless. You should have stayed out of this. Richie stared at him. Are you part of them? Your paddy did not answer, but his silence was louder than any confession. Richie felt something break inside her chest. The person she trusted most had been standing beside the very people she suspected. You took my phone. Your paddy nodded. Yes. Richie's eyes widened. The videos, your paddy sighed again. They are gone. For a moment, the world became very quiet for Richie. The only sound she could hear was the sound of betrayal settling into her bones. Your paddy spoke again. You should forget this matter. Richie stared at him. Forget? Yes, for your own safety. Richie's voice became very calm. You helped them. Your paddy looked away. I helped watch the compound. Richie finally understood the truth. Your paddy had not been helping her investigate. He had been helping them monitor the compound, watching for anyone who might notice too much. For several seconds, Richie simply stood there looking at him. Then she slowly nodded. Okay. Your paddy looked surprised. Okay. Yes, after all, I have nothing more to prove. Yes, after all, I have nothing to prove, Richie said and turned towards the house. Your paddy watched her carefully. He had expected her to shout or cry. He had expected accusations that would attract half the compound. But Richie did none of those things. Still, he pushed away any uneasy thoughts aside and moved on. Inside the house, Mama Abena looked up from the table. "Where is your phone?" she asked. Richie shrugged. "It is gone." Mama Abena frowned. "Gone?" "Yes, your paddy lost it." Mama Abena sighed loudly. "That boy will be the end of somebody's patience." Richie smiled. "It's just a phone." Mama Abena shook her head. But you said that phone was your journalism career." Richie shrugged again. "Maybe journalism is not for me." That answer shocked Mama Abena more than the lost phone. The girl who once recorded chickens fighting and water queues had suddenly lost interest in recording anything. Within 2 days, the compound noticed the change. Richie stopped filming. She stopped sitting near the gates observing people, and she stopped asking questions. Auntie Efwa even commented about it one afternoon. "Camera girl has retired," she announced. Richie laughed. "I am tired of chasing stories." Your paddy heard this and relaxed a little. That evening, Mr. Mensah even stopped Richie near the gate. "I heard you lost your phone," he said kindly. Richie nodded. "Yes, that is unfortunate." He shook his head. Richie shrugged. "It happens." Mr. Mensah studied her face carefully and then asked, "You are not recording again?" Richie shook her head. "I have decided to retire from journalism." Mr. Mensah smiled. "That is a good decision. You should focus on something more productive." Richie smiled back. "Yes, sir." He nodded and walked away. Life in the compound slowly returned to normal. Mama Abena shouted about charcoal again. The missing girls remained missing, and the fear in the neighborhood had begun fading the way fear often fades when people grow tired of being afraid. Your paddy became comfortable again. He joked with Richie and laughed loudly in the compound. He believed the problem had ended since the evidence had disappeared with the lost phone. What he did not know was that Richie had always been more careful than people realized. The night after she watched the strange video of Mr. Mensah and Pastor Nyako beside the car, something had deeply bothered her. So she had done something simple. She had emailed the video to herself and had uploaded it to a cloud storage account she once created when practicing how journalists store files online. So you see, the phone was gone, but the videos were not. 1 week later, Richie sat discreetly inside a small office in central Accra, across from a journalist named Kojo Aduse. Kojo watched the recordings on a computer screen without speaking. First, the balcony conversation, then the midnight car, then the figure moving weakly inside the back seat. Kojo leaned back slowly. "This is serious." Richie nodded. "I know." Kojo looked at her suspiciously. "Why did you come to me?" Richie answered, "Because powerful people are involved. I can't do it alone." Kojo nodded. "That is correct." Within days, Kojo contacted some investigators quietly, and the police began monitoring the locations connected to the blue car. They watched movements, followed vehicles, and traced phone numbers. Then, one night, the operation finally happened. Several houses across the city were raided. Inside those houses, the police found something terrible. Young women who had been held secretly. Some were the same girls the neighborhood believed had disappeared forever. The story exploded across the news. Mr. Kweku Mensah and Pastor Nyako was arrested. Several other people connected to the network were arrested too, and among them was one very shocked young man named Yopadi, who never imagined that the girl he believed he had silenced had quietly carried the evidence far beyond the compound gates. When the news reached the neighborhood, Auntie F1 nearly lost her voice from excitement. "I knew something was wrong in this compound," she declared proudly. Mama Abena sat beside Richie that evening. "You did this?" she asked. Richie nodded. Mama Abena stared at her daughter for a long moment. Then she shook her head slowly and said, All this time, I thought that phone was causing trouble. Richie smiled. Mama, sometimes trouble needs to be recorded. Hi, besties. Thank you so much for watching the story. This story is dedicated to one of our besties, Richie. Happy birthday, dear Richie. May this new year of your life bring you more courage, more wisdom, and more beautiful experiences. May your dreams grow bigger, and may every step you take lead you closer to the life you desire. Dear besties, please let's wish her well in the comment section. Kindly share this story out with your loved ones and give the story a thumbs up. Subscribe to this channel if you've not done so by now. Until I bring another story your way. Bye.